So who are you and what do you do?
I'm Stephanie Harrison. I'm the author of New Happy and the founder of an organization called The New Happy. And my work is focused on helping people to, you guessed it, find more happiness in their lives.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what it means to be happy. Let's start there. What does it actually even mean for us to be happy anymore? Do
You
we
know,
know?
that is the question that really propelled me into this field of work. Feeling like so much of the messages that we had received when we were younger or from our society were not seeming to work. It didn't seem like all of the things that we were told to do in order to be happy were working. And so, big part of my focus has been, what does the scientific research say about happiness, and how do we redefine it for ourselves and also hopefully culturally, so that we can avoid people having to do this work in the future?
So, how are we doing? I mean, this world is crazy. I know that we had rescheduled this conversation. And even as I was preparing for it twice, I often found myself saying, do we even know what this is? Like, what does this
Yeah.
mean anymore? It seems like we're inundated with messages of non happiness, actually.
Yeah. The World Happiness Report that came out this year, the US slipped to the lowest level it's ever been at before. A big study just came out yesterday showing that for the first time, young adults are experiencing profound unhappiness in their lives. So, what you're talking about is very real. And my belief is that it comes from something that I call old happy, which is these messages about happiness that we receive that profoundly shape the way that we live our lives. And specifically, old happy tells us that we're not good enough as we are, that we have to achieve certain goals to prove that we're good enough, and then we have to do everything by ourselves. And if we can do these things, then we will be able to be happy. But what my research has found is that, in fact, these are not pursuits of happiness. They're pursuits of misery. They will never, ever make you happy. That's not what they're designed to do. And so we have to fundamentally transform the way that we think about happiness if we want to experience it, not just as individuals, but also as a collective.
So, I mean, I saw that and I thought to myself, I'm not sure I'm clear on what that means, though, because
Yeah.
I would look at my life and struggles we have at work, whether you're working for somebody or whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you have kids,
Mm.
and the ability to have a goal, aim for something, go after it, achieve it. Those probably would be in reflection the moments where I have had a sense of accomplishment, of fulfillment, of doing something hard and having a result. Even things like being fired upon reflection
Mm.
tend to be very powerful things that take you to another place, that help you discover something else. What am I missing in the nuance of that?
Yeah, I'm definitely not against goals. Goals are a wonderful thing, and they're an essential part of being a human. That we all have this powerful internal motivation within us that is a core driver of happiness, just as you're describing. And that also is what allows us to bounce back from those setbacks, like getting fired or going through setbacks or other challenges in our lives. The problem is that we have this idea of the goals that we're supposed to pursue that will make us happy. And so there are, depending on your background, on your family, upon your culture, upon so many of these different factors, there are things that you feel pressured to do, compelled by forces outside of you. And when you pursue those goals, those do not lead to happiness, they lead to ill being. And so, what we want to do is take that beautiful, ambitious nature that we all have within us to grow and to make an impact and to shape the world in some way and channel it in the ways that serve us rather than the ways that do not. Because that societal pressure to always seek out, like more and more money, more and more success, fame, fortune, power, whatever it is, these extrinsic goals, they cannot support your well-being. And so instead, I want people to reorient themselves towards what matters to them and then pursue that, because that is a path to happiness, just as you're describing.
But do you fear that by doing that, it could be creating some type of self limitation? I often thought of this because I
Mm,
remember being very young and thinking one of the metrics would be wealth.
yeah.
And having achieved wealth, I feel that it's true.
Mm,
People will say, like, money doesn't buy happiness. And maybe our definitions of happiness are different, but when I can suddenly afford things like great health care, to take my family and have these amazing experiences that I knew prior to it I couldn't do, and that it felt like it was in a certain way me not fulfilling what my capabilities were. This is the area where I'm always, yes, you can have people with tremendous wealth and power that are miserable and terrible human beings, but alleviating certain stresses that we all face, things like financial or health-based, these seem to me fundamental paths to having a state of happiness.
Yeah, I agree with you. They provide for when unfortunately, to your point, we live in a society where you need money to be able to be healthy or to take care of your health when things go wrong or to provide safety. And those needs, which I would group under, like intrinsic goals, because they are devoted to safety or towards, as you said, providing experiences to your family, which is ultimately like an act of love. It's not for you. Like, you're not seeking out money to, like decorate your life with like possessions and with different materials or things like that in order to show off how wealthy you are. You're doing it for a very different reason, right? And it's that intention behind it that matters. And of course, everyone deserves to be able to provide and fulfill those needs for their loved ones. And I think that that's very different from saying I'm seeking out, I want to be like a billionaire because that's what I think will make me happy, versus I'm seeking out certain goals in my career because I want to give my family a good life. Those are fundamentally different intentions, in my opinion.
So is that line when it's material based or status based, meaning when you say external, is it external so much as cultural or our perception of what social pressure is? Is that the delineating line? Because, for example, I could say, I make a lot of money, but I want a lot of money because I like collecting comic books or art. And I definitely have an appreciation for it. So I don't do it for status or to show people. I do it because I myself have such a deep appreciation for it.
Exactly. It's sort of like the kind of, does it come from within or does it impose from without? And what's the differentiation between the two? Using that can be a really helpful question.
So we live in a world that is driven by status. It seems like we have a population that pushes or strives for it. I don't think we would have even had the proliferation of social media and other platforms if it wasn't about seeing others and then realizing very quickly in early 2000s that what we're doing also is self-promoting our best self. And that in a certain way, it leads to both depression and happiness. We feel good about it because people like and comment and tell us how much they like us. But we know that that's cyclical in terms of a psychological thing where we have to keep pursuing those accolades, that feedback. How did that play into our level of happiness or how you perceive things?
Yeah, I think that social media, the way I like to think about it, it's a tool. And so like any other tool, it's shaped by the person who's wielding it. And so when we are using social media in an old happy cultural framework, it's exactly what you're describing, right? It's how do I put this image of myself forward so that people will like me, or I'll be popular, or I'll be able to get the feelings that I want to feel on the inside, like confidence and self-esteem and self-love and all of those things that ultimately, can only come from the inside, unfortunately. And so that then creates a vicious cycle where people see that and then they want to also participate in that ecosystem. And so they do the same thing. And we end up with this culture that you're describing of people using social media as a status game. And I think that I have always thought that perhaps it was possible to also use social media for good, for connection, for service, for authenticity, for helping people. And the more that we can set examples of that, my hope is that others might follow in those footsteps. And I don't pretend to believe that it's like as sexy as posting photos on a yacht or whatever it is that all those people are doing. But my hope is that it gives people a better feeling on the inside and hope about what's possible for them.
Talk about your journey with social media. I mean, it is the way in which we found out about Stephanie Harrison. I'm sure it is the results of that led to things like publisher being interested in a book deal. Walk me through a bit of how you did it. It seemed very similar to how I've used it as well. I'll often feel that I'm sometimes in a minority or self-limiting the potential growth because of what I believe the general public
Yeah.
wants more of.
Mm.
We'll go back and forth on this, but I'd love to hear your side.
Yeah, I funnily enough, I hated social media. I never had I didn't I had deleted my personal account years ago. And I felt just what I'm saying, like I thought, God, this is the worst of old happy, everything here. And then when the pandemic hit and I was, in my house and had no real way to reach people, I thought, well, this is a moment where I can sit here and like kind of feel sad that I can't share these ideas in some way, or I can try and do something about it and maybe offer something different. And so that's when I started, the sharing kind of the artwork that I make and posting about these ideas on social media. And I think that honestly, I think that the the things I'm trying to do there are trying to make that small shift in the culture in the small ways that I can, like how do we create spaces where people feel good and empowered and supported rather than even so much of the mental health content on social media is all about like what's wrong with you and the problems that you have and the things that you need to fix about yourself. And I wanted to just offer something different that I would have probably found valuable as well. And so that's when I started to get over my distaste and try to make it a little bit better.
So it worked for you. It's worked for me. There's no doubt. I was in the game a lot earlier in the early 2000s. I often think of my philosophy towards this is I'm trying to be personable, not personal. And that I've removed anything related to spouses, kids,
Yeah.
trips. As somebody who speaks a lot for a living, there's the trap of I'm on a plane, I'm in a hotel, I'm in a conference room versus how can I take the content that I provide that's adding value, place that in the system and provide value to someone
Yeah.
else. My belief is that it scales, but not as effectively as the inflation of our own tires, as I like to say. We like to
Oh,
inflate our
that's
own
great.
tires and
I
put it
love
out there.
that.
Talk a bit about reconciling that. I'm not sure after 2 decades of doing this that I've been able to reconcile it. I often will reflect and think, if I was just a little bit more self-involved, this would be a much bigger platform to reach people.
I think people probably really appreciate that though about you. I'm the same. I never share anything about my personal life. And I keep it focused on service and the content that I can provide that helps people. And um, I often hear from people that that's something that they appreciate and that it makes it feel different to them. And so I would say the same thing to you. It makes it feel different and it's more, I'm sure it's more aligned with your values as well, which ultimately makes it more fulfilling at the end of the day. But yeah, I hear you. It's not easy to go against the grain.
Yeah, I mean, and look, we live in a world where a lot of our peers who have written books, who speak, who consult, part of the reason they do it is because of the feedback loop. If the feedback loop was people saying, I'm not going to like that, I'm not going to comment and tell you how great you're doing, because ultimately we post this for some type of self-affirmation.
Yeah.
This is cool that I'm doing this, or I want people to feel like I'm doing things that are important. There's something deep in there. It's something in the philosophy that I'm wondering, why do people on the other side, the receiving side, also continue it? Why do we propagate that, not as the creators of it, but as the consumers of it?
I think that people have, I see it as social media is a place where you can help people. And so to me, maybe I see it more naively or more innocently than what you're describing here. But I think that there are many people out there who genuinely do not have a lot of support in their lives, and they do not have a lot of uh, people who can be there for them or give them the information that they need or guide them on their journey. And so they turn to what's available. And a lot of that is on social media. And they have a genuine appreciation for those people who are able to help them. And so to me, I sort of see it as a feedback loop of giving and receiving more so of, like, here's what I can put out today. Here's what I can offer. If it reaches somebody, that's wonderful. If it's something where they feel moved to share how it makes them feel, then they're kind words, for me at least, end up giving me the energy and the encouragement to keep going, because it's very hard to do something without getting feedback, obviously. It's very hard to persist at something if you feel like you're not being able to make the impact that you'd like to, or the touching people in the ways that you're interested in. And so I view it as potentially like the encouragement and the support. At least that's how it feels for me. The kindness that my community has shown me online has been what helped me to navigate and many difficult times in my own life, as well as continue to persist in sharing my thoughts and ideas.
So talk a little bit about this idea. This is very unique. I don't think I've ever spoken about this, but how we accept feedback seems like it's part of the system. So what can we do to accept feedback and understand when it's somewhat just complimentary versus pandering to the ego, where I'm sure, like you also look at the content, look at the feedback and think, oh, I should do more of this because this is what my audience likes. But that in and of itself could be some type of trapping as well.
Yeah, it is. I think about this a lot. I feel there are a lot of, so as a creator, this is something that I never would have known before I started creating content, which is exactly what you're describing. As a creator, you are constantly getting feedback about what people in your audience or community like and what they do not like. And if you are, very intent on growing your account, you will double down on the stuff that they do like. And unfortunately, the stuff that people like online is what they want to hear, and it's not always what they need to hear. And because what they need to hear is very difficult to articulate for a creator, it's very hard to make saleable or exciting for people. And it's hard, so it doesn't get distributed very well, and then it doesn't get amplified because people aren't that excited about it. And so you're disincentivized multiple ways in order to focus on this content that people want to hear. So I am very skeptical of creators who post only viral content or content that always does well, because that means in many ways that they're providing one very small slice of a worldview or of advice or of content, and they're neglecting a lot of information that their audience needs to hear. And so in those cases, I think we need to be very tough on ourselves as creators and ask, like, how am I not serving my audience through what I'm not telling them, or the context that I'm not giving them, and continue doing that. And so as an example, like my whole thing, the New Happy's whole message is helping people will make you happy. That is not a very popular thing to say. And whenever I post content about helping people, it's never going to do as well as some other stuff that I might post about. But I'm going to keep posting about it because I know that people need to hear it. And I think that we have to be very mindful of this as creators. And I also want consumers to be very mindful of it as well.
Yeah, it's such a challenging space. I was in the music industry for a long time, and you'd hear this story always. It would happen traditionally on the sophomore release, but then as the band would get more successful, or the artist, it started traipsing into everything, where they would create in the mindset of, is this the type of songs that a fan of this likes? And I grapple with this because if you look at artists, Bob Dylan would be a great example of this, where he won't play any of the hits. He's still creating original music. He's in his 80s. And there is a massive bifurcation in that audience live. Some people go to the show and are like, what was that? Like, I didn't hear any hits from this legend. Some people are like, oh, it's amazing that he's still creating original music. And some people are like, yes, it's still great he's creating original music, but I don't like it as much as the other work. And there's something really interesting, and it does filter down into how we perceive our own happiness, about even what you were speaking about, originality versus being homogeneous. This easy trap we can get in. Even as you said that, I thought to myself, but what if you're wrong, Stephanie? Like, what if what you think is this happiness from helping others, and you're happy to create that, but ultimately when you're doing the other stuff, it's that different stuff that the audience is really latching onto. Like, that is a signal I grapple with all of this all the time.
Yeah, it is. And I think, you know, it doesn't diminish. I love that story, by the way. I think with the musicians, that's such an
So true.
perfect way to think about it, right? Like,
You've seen fights of bands like Metallica is a great example of this, because they've released documentaries where they're fighting over a song, and somebody always says in every fight, yes, but is this something that a Metallica fan would want or expects? And I'm always like, oh, like that's a bad conversation to have.
Wow. Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it? Like, so to your question, when you are, if I'm just trying to think about how to articulate this. So let's say that, for example, the the content that people really enjoy, it doesn't mean that it's less valuable or important. It might be more salient and more of an immediate need. And so, for example, a lot of what I do is about helping people learn how to work with their emotions, which are immediate and in the moment. And usually, if you're feeling something when you're on social media or engaging with content, and so sometimes it strikes and you're like, yeah, I am angry right now, or I am sad, and this is really useful for me in this moment. Or like last week I was really angry or I was really sad, and so it feels very pressing and important. So that doesn't mean it's not valuable to do that, but my challenge is that I think that our worldview is flawed, and so that requires that we take a much bigger step back and challenge a lot of these ideas and look at them from different angles and wonder, like, what are we doing here that's needs to be looked at or questioned in some way. And specifically, what's really interesting as well is all of the advice that I'm giving in those videos about emotions, for example, it's all informed by my research and this new worldview. So it's not like it's divorced from that in some way, right? Like it's built upon those ideas, but I'm not communicating them, and therefore they're more they're kind of more, people might find them easier to learn in that way versus being overt and very explicit and saying, like, go help somebody and it'll make you happy.
So let's zoom out and take this idea of a flawed worldview. I think it's so powerful. I was going to ask you about your news consumption habits, like, because I'll read the book New Happy and connect with it and then feel two things. One is it's really hard to feel that way if you have any form of news consumption in the world today. You could look at multiple wars that are happening, upcoming presidential elections, presidential candidates. You could look at so many things that are overbearing, that isn't just there's some violence in my city, or there's a big global hunger issue or climate issue. It seems quite pervasive that we see this. And why I think of this as that flawed worldview that you're speaking about is because it would be so easy to actually not focus on that. And yet it's flies to light, it's mosquitoes to, like, we are infinitely not only attracted to it, but we then become opinionated on it. We then become very against others who may or may not believe what we think is right. It's reinforced by the type of stories we hear. And so it's easy to sit back and think, I can't be happy in this environment. Even if I can achieve all of the things in New Happy, look at what's going on out there, type of thing.
Well, I think that actually all of the chaos in our world presents us with big opportunities to experience happiness, because in working towards addressing them, we are given this chance to use our gifts to help people. And so I don't feel a sense of hopelessness or despair of what's going on. I feel sad and frustrated sometimes, and I feel like the range of difficult emotions that come, but that feeling of, oh, there's no hope, or there's nothing we can do or I can do, I don't feel that, because I know that I can do something, and doing that something is what will bring me happiness. The more that I can help and the more that I can contribute, the opportunities that I have in front of me to experience that joy from that fulfillment of helping people actually expand. And so personally, in terms of news consumption, I usually just try and read like the newspaper in the morning. Just the new, like, just I try and keep up with the one paper, like one newsletter, know what's going on, and then sort of go back to work. Like, I think being informed is important to be a part of a civil society, but as you said, it's very easy to get sucked into arguments and speculation and all the other stuff that comes along with that. And I see all of that as being very unproductive.
I agree. I just struggle with certain aspects of it. I'll give you one, and we can leave names out of it because they're going to be quite obvious. But it looks like in the United States, I'm based in Canada, there will be the voting in of an individual again after another cycle who really sums up the opposite of everything you're saying in the book, that has been quote unquote successful and happy, quote unquote, through scheming, through selling and pitching, and not through the service of others, but in the service primarily of themselves, maybe of their family, or maybe in power, and maybe even every tenant of Old Happy. If we would look at beyond purpose and self-love, but we can go through the three ones as the ones that might be very overt. It says something about society because we can choose to not vote that person in. We can say, we're different. This is a democracy. We welcome all different voices. We want the people who are successful to be the helpers, the people that we admire.
Yeah.
But we are voting in a democracy.
It's very disappointing.
So, and again, like I don't want you to, it's not about the individual. It's about the mindset of the population. And I've been saying this for a while, pre-COVID to now, that all of these wonderful books come out about empathy and resilience and diversity and how we do things. And yet, if you just look at the reality of it, it doesn't feel like these great ideas permeate to both the masses and then the ones in power who can actually affect change.
Yeah. So, yeah. I think that that's because people are operating, going back to the flawed worldview. If you're operating under an old happy worldview, then you think that your happiness comes first because other people don't really matter. And you do that through pursuing all of those things that you just described. And once you're successful, then you can maybe help people if you want to.
Become generous after.
Yeah, but you don't have to. It's a nice to have. Things like empathy and compassion and inclusion get pushed way down on the list, right? Because you're busy trying to be successful and pursue your own happiness. And so my belief is that the reason why these ideas haven't caught on is because people haven't connected it to their self-interest. And that's what I'm trying to do with this book. Your happiness, the thing that you want most in life, can be fulfilled through helping other people, through compassion, through empathy, through inclusion, through caring for your neighbor, through showing up for other people, through trying to make a difference in the world. It's not the afterthought. It's the main thought. We have to start there. And we have to connect people's self-interest to this other interest for us to see change happen. And I don't think until we do that, we will see the results that we're hoping for in terms of the shift in our culture.
So what do you say to somebody who is like that? And by the way, I would say the vast majority of people that I know fall into that place, whether it's even through their church or their synagogue or mosque or what have you, that they're good citizens of the world. Yeah. They want their neighbors to be prosperous. They know that if I live in a healthy neighborhood, it's going to be a healthier life. But they still look at the world and see a certain level of injustice, that they're not able to get ahead, that even though they're doing all this on the limits that they have, it seems like everything is some type of loophole or game or hustle or something like that. And it's hard because then we are trying to define success, going back to what we talked about earlier with material goals and status. But even when people would say, I am successful and I am quote unquote happy, they still don't feel like there's the reciprocation of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. People, I think many of us have probably had the experience of doing our best to be a good person and then having it taken for granted, or, taken advantage of, and how easy it is to just be like, well, I'm done with this and, screw this. This is for suckers, that kind of thing. And I think that I acknowledge how hard it is. My own experiences and have given me that empathy as well. But I think that um, it really is defined by how we respond, even when things aren't going the way that we want to, and our insistence on clinging to goodness, even when it's really hard. And right now, it's really, really hard because of those examples that you're citing. And the more of us that can still persistently cling to goodness and determine to express it and cultivate it and celebrate it when we see it, the more that we'll be able to fight that rising tide. And I think that that's sort of the only thing that will, is when the normal people like us are determined to fight for something better. And we can make change happen. It's just slow and frustrating and often 2 steps forward, 1 steps back.
I don't know how familiar you are with the work of Steven Pinker, but this is what he talks a lot about at a very large scale.
Yeah.
This idea that right now in this moment, you and I, Stephanie, as a human beings, have probably never been able to be happier. That we live in a world where, if you think of what are the things that have stopped a society from progressing, we are in the best possible moment in any point in the history of anything. He was speaking in particular about recently what's happening in Gaza and saying it's hard for him to even say it, but this is a small regional conflict that has taken on this massive thing, and it makes everybody feel this certain level of inequity. And while it may be true in many instances and not in others, in the grand scale of things, the focusing on that is the wrong thing to focus on, because we should actually be celebrating the fact that if this had happened at any other point in time, the casualty rate would have been much crazier. Again, not justifying anything, but just in this idea of we tend to not focus on how good we actually have it. And these amplifications of things like that make it really challenging. Do you think about it not just in the self and what we do in the community, but in that grander context of just humanity blip in time, 100 plus years in millions of years of evolution?
Yeah, it's sort of hard not to be humbled when you think about it that way, right?
Third rock from the sun, right?
Yeah, my problems are not such a big deal at all. And in the grand scheme of things, to your point, compared to throughout history, they're really not a big deal at all. I do. I think it's a perspective that can often be really helpful to remind ourselves of, and to think about all that we have. We have our negativity bias, which compels us to focus on all of our problems as well, and to miss so much of the good that's already around us. Like, one of the things that I find the funniest about us human beings is we will work so hard and sacrifice so much and push ourselves so hard, and to try and get more good things in our lives, to try and achieve things or to acquire something. And then we spend literally no time noticing the good that we already have. We never attend to it in those ways. And so I think, one of my favorite things to do is to just remember, like, all of the blessings that are around me right now, and the ones that I've learned to take for granted over time. And how can I see that with new eyes? Because it can shift you into that space of feeling an immense gratitude for all that you have, instead of that, pervasive sense of, oh, I don't have enough, or I'm not good enough, that really plagues modern life.
Probably the simplest trick to reducing stress and anxiety is, in the moment, what are you grateful for? And not even the big things, but the little things. Like, I don't have a cold today. That's something to be pretty, or I don't have, I didn't test positive for COVID, as the case may be.
Yeah.
And yet we don't. I mean, this is the thing that always gets me. It's simple things. It's not even medication or months and months of therapy. It's not even to the point of saying you got to read this book called New Happy, which can seem, book reading isn't something everybody does.
Totally.
Why do we miss those very simple, easy, small things? Why do we miss them? What's your thinking on why we avoid the chance to be happy in the moment?
We've just been conditioned for our whole lives to think there's something else out there. Like, I think that's sometimes part of what drives the response to people when I say, if you want to be happy, help people. Because I think that people want to believe the secret to happiness is something different from that. They want to think it's something grander and more important and more kind of something you could put up on a wall and show off. But no, like, the next moment that I have to help somebody is my next potential moment of happiness. And additionally, to your point, I can also experience a great deal of happiness by simply looking around and noticing all of the good that I have, which was given to me by somebody, because I didn't build this house that's keeping me safe right now, right? Somebody else did that for me. I didn't make the food that I ate this morning for breakfast. That came from somebody else's hard work. So gratitude is in and of itself an expression of recognizing all that you have received from another person. And that, when you start to see that, it changes your perspective on everything, in my opinion.
I sat there forever and thought, I just want to be happy. I know that when I'm happy, this will happen. It led to a lot of anxiety and pressure and unfulfillment, actually. And what turned the corner for me is a book I read a long time ago by Russ Harris called The Happiness Trap. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. Russ is very well known as being one of the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And the lesson, I might botch this, and if I do, feel free to step in, is this absurdity that happiness is a state, a place, any form of permanence, that know that we live in a world with a bunch of emotions and that you can never have extreme happiness unless you're okay with extreme sadness and things like that. That this idea of trying to be somewhere in at all this framework of happiness is an absurdity of itself, that is the moment. And that you are in these moments, and some of them will be happy, some of them, there'll just be a scale of emotions, and that to get rid of any negative emotion means that we are in no way able to create a positive one. Can you reflect on some of that thinking in relation to your work and what that means? Because I do feel that we know these things, and yet we still pursue this one concept of, I just want to be happy. It's the sentence I hear from everybody all the time.
Yeah. I completely agree with everything that you just shared from the book. There's no destination that will ever make you happy. There's no goal you can achieve. It
won't sustain, even if you do.
Exactly. And once you get a couple of years behind you, you start to get the proof, because you can think about the times where you were able to perhaps achieve the thing that you thought would make you happy. And then you can notice that it doesn't really work. And you have all this evidence in front of you if you're willing to look at it. So I completely agree. We should never strive for happiness as this expectation, this destination, or this state. We should really, I think happiness is ultimately in many ways about what you just said. It's about embracing all of your emotions and recognizing your humanity and seeking to cultivate that humanity and share it with others and find ways to live in alignment with your values and what matters most to you. And it's much more of a way of being than anything else.
Yeah. What are some of the tips you give people for figuring out, because it's one thing to get to this point where we are in service of others. The way we get in service of others is understanding who we are, what our gifts are, and how we can use them. Is that the tricky part? Is it the gift part that's the tricky part?
I think that's often the hardest part for most people, to be honest. Again, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, most people don't have people in their lives who can point out their gifts to them, to cultivate them, to nurture them, to support them. I talk in the book about how many of the most famous, celebrated people of all time, they were simply spotted. Somebody spotted their talent at a very early age, and then they pick them up and they put them in an environment that would cultivate that talent. And what that indicates to me is that many of us have those capabilities, but they're latent within us. They just haven't necessarily been cultivated in that way. And so if you can start by figuring out your gifts and the ways in which they can be used in your daily life, then all of a sudden your worldview changes, right? Because you start to look at your life as, here's a canvas for me to express that gift or to cultivate it or develop it. And from there, it becomes a lot easier to see how you can use it to help people.
So what does that look like? Help us understand how we discover or uncover them. I feel like because I've led a semi-public life, that I get that feedback. That I know when I'm moving from owning a business to being asked to speak or present to doing things like a podcast or appearing on radio, I'm given these chances to do things that bring the gift out a little bit more, that it took me half a century to be able to acknowledge them. To be able to respect them, to think that they're things that are worth monetizing even, or making them of value. I think most people probably go to work and would hear this conversation and think, it was time for this.
Yeah. Um, you can embed this into your life really easily. So I break down that there are three different types of gifts. Your humanity is who you are as a person. So this is your character. It's your kindness, your compassion, your empathy, your patience, your thoughtfulness, all of the virtuous things that we think about when we think about character. And we can cultivate our character every single day in our lives. It can be as simple as pausing and as you walk into your office, taking a detour and checking on somebody who you work with, who you know is having a hard time, and just saying like, hey, how's it going? Do you need anything? Can I support you? Can I be there for you? So your humanity gifts can be used as you navigate every moment of your day, essentially, because you're always in connection with other people in one way or another. Your wisdom gifts come from what you have experienced in your life. So this is the hard won lessons that often come from our challenges. They also might come from your achievements. So, for example, Mitch, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I really want to become a speaker, you would have a lot of wisdom to share with them because you've done it and you have walked that path and you've learned a ton. And then it can come from other people's wisdom as well. So maybe you, from what you learn in school or from doing research or from studying theory. So the best way to start tapping into your wisdom gifts is to take a little audit of all of your life experiences and to start to identify who might find this useful or where might I be able to use it. And then your third type of gift is your talent. And this is the one that we're probably the most familiar with because it's highly celebrated most of the time. But your talent is something that can be cultivated. And what you need to do in order to do that is to identify the little sparks of interest or curiosity or excitement that you have about something in your life, and then devote yourself to building it through repeated effort and hard work and getting into a state of flow. And then as you do that, your talent will get stronger and stronger and you can find new ways to use it. And so, for example, I am not a trained artist or designer in any way. And now a big part of my work is doing that, making
Creating
art.
art.
And the only way I did that was I was locked in my house during the pandemic, and I had no other way of kind of communicating with people. And I thought, well, screw it. I've always dreamed about being an artist. What if I just tried making something? And then I sat there and I spent hours every single day learning how to do it. And something I never would have imagined possible. So, and we hear all these great stories, right, about people who learn a talent at certain moments in their lives. It's possible for anybody. We just have to find the right thing and then devote ourselves through the work.
I've told this story countless times. I'll tell it again because I still grapple with it myself, which is grade 9 or 10, not doing well in math, and just told, hey, maybe math's not for you. And you live with that. And I've only been thinking about this lately. You start having kids and seeing challenges they have or opportunities they're showing. And I wonder to myself if these things are true. Is that true that I'm not good in math? Or maybe I just, like we made a decision when we're 14 years old, as he frowns and thinks about who makes a decision at 14 that sticks for a lifetime. We have so many of those. You talked about the art thing. I had somebody in grade 10 or 11, an art teacher, say to me, oh, you're very creative. Have you considered a job in a creative pursuit? And I was in a school that didn't really have that. It was much more lawyer, doctor, science. And I wound up pursuing that. And I often reflect on that one little off comment that I'm sure that art teacher never thought twice of in any moment. There's something really interesting in there when you have this thing in you, Stephanie, that would say, maybe I am an artist. That's a very big leap. It's not a small leap. It's a massive one.
Yeah.
So can you reconcile that thought with how you bring that out? Because even in my current state where I could pursue mathematics, I'm still like, I don't know. But I'm curious if I'm right or wrong, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, of course. As somebody who was also told in grade 9 or grade 10, I can't remember. I think it was grade 10 because it was like,
that's a serious year. I think it was grade 10 too, if I reflect on it.
It's the same thing. Oh, you're not good at math. And then from there on, I was in my head, I'm somebody who's bad at math, right? And
they must know. They're the teachers, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And even now, like I use a lot of math in my artwork because it's all very geometrical and it's all laid out in a certain way. And so maybe if I had been taught how to do math in that way, it would have connected with me and I would have never had this identity as somebody who's bad at math, right? So I think it's really about thinking through those moments, both the moments where somebody said something to you, where they pointed it out, no matter how small it was. Because I also had an art teacher who said, like, you seem to really love this. Like, can you do
Yeah.
something about it? And I just brushed it off. And it sat there latent for a really long time. And thinking about those moments where somebody pointed something out to you, you can also think about people who you're envious of. Like, if you could swap lives with somebody and you had to get up and do the same thing they do every single day. So this isn't about like getting the house that they have.
Yeah, it's not the result.
Yeah.
It's the effort to result that people don't want to talk about. But yes, let's go down there. Yeah.
It's so, like, let's say somebody's looking at you and they're like, "Oh, I'm so jealous. I would love to get on stage in front of people and talk about this stuff." Cool. That's a great sign that you might be interested in this. So go explore it and go figure it out. I call it like panning for gold. Like, what are these little gold sparks in your life that you can identify in order to then explore them a little and just poke at them and say, like, maybe art isn't for me, but I really love collecting art instead. That's more my speed. And so I'm going to go down that route. It's almost like, you want to find the right road, and then there's all these little side roads that go off of it, and you can start to explore those and treating it almost like a little bit of an adventure. But I guarantee, like, we all have things inside of us that light us up. We just often are used to dismissing them or saying, that's impractical, that's stupid, I shouldn't do that. And so the more that we can honor it, the more that we can explore it.
I'm in a similar space. I'd add on to that some new thinking that I've been having, which is I do a lot of public speaking. And I would often hear people say, "Oh, like, I should be a keynote speaker." And my reaction would be somewhat defiant, like, you could try, but like, lately what I've been doing, it's a nuance, but it's very much related to it, is when someone says that to me, I self-identify about the skill that I have and I appreciate it more. Meaning, how good must I be at this if someone sees it and thinks it's easy?
So true. Yeah.
And it's a massive paradigm shift in who I am.
Yeah.
Oh, I should write a book. Oh, I should speak. Like, all these things that I've been toiling with for almost 40 years at this point.
Yeah. Like, devoted yourself to day in and day out and crafting and doing the work. Of course. Yeah.
And there is publicness on this, meaning no one has ever said that about brain surgery. Oh, like, I should do that. Like, because we have this thing in our brain that's obviously very, very complicated and takes years to master, but we don't apply it across the board broadly.
Yeah.
And I think that this is part of the trick in going through some of the work in New Happy that's challenging, is we can make this assumption like that would make me happy. Yeah. But understanding that, oh, Mitch is very good at not saying ums and uhs and stammering over his words, because prior to 20 years of doing a podcast, he did over 15 years of interviewing and having to transcribe from cassette conversations with rock stars, and realized in those that he sounds very annoying when he talks, that I had to train myself because it was so annoying to transcribe myself over 15 years. Yeah. That these things matter and that they're important. But I think the challenge for most people is they tend to see them as being somewhat easy.
Of course they do. Yeah. It's not given the same level of respect as brain surgery or if anything else, even though everything is a craft. And I think I would say, to build off what you're saying, which I completely agree with and absolutely love, you want to love the work. Like, you want to love the process. And if you're in it for the results, you will give up. Because, to your point, the results take a long time. They don't happen overnight. For 99.9% of people, they take diligence and creativity and sweat equity and all of that stuff. And so if you can find something where you genuinely can enjoy parts of the process, maybe not all of it, maybe the transcribing part was really brutal, but that was obviously a form of deliberate practice. Yeah. And, I don't love like messing around with the layout of an image all of the time and figuring out the exact mathematical proportions, or working on something for weeks and then having to scrap it or whatever. But I love the process of doing it in a way, and I know that that's a necessary ingredient. And so we have to find things where we can enjoy the doing, because I just think, like, the reason most people give up on stuff is because they're pursuing the goal for the wrong reasons, and they're not engaged in the way that they need to be with the process.
I was thinking about this for my third book, and in full transparency, the second book came out more than a decade ago. So the chances of this happening are pretty low. But this idea, the working title was The Middle. that if we think about business in particular and success, all we ever talk about is the start and the end. And that actually all of the good is in the middle. It's the part that nobody ever talks about in the history of anything. Think about it.
So
even
true.
As a business owner, like, what's your next idea? Or you just, or this is our exit. What are you going to do next? And what I realized in having my own beginning, middle, and end in my last business where we had an exit was that as much as fun as it was starting was really sucky, actually. It was really hard. And ending, as we talked about, it creates this period at the end of a sentence that has maybe some type of emphasis on it, but it's quite unfulfilling to what we think it will ultimately be. So where was the value? It was all in the middle. It was once the thing was started and before we left it, of what we did to nurture it, to grow it, and how we are so dismissive of it at every stage. Like we never celebrate middles. We never do.
I adore that idea.
But it's
I really hope you write it. It's
we'll co-author it.
No, that's so cool, because I can just picture, like, you're right. No one ever wants to talk about it ever. And it's such a blind spot because that is truly the important part, right? Oh, that's genius. I absolutely love it.
Well, also, like, there's this new form of documentary, and I'm sure you've seen them, on crafts, and most of it is Japanese for some strange reason, but people are doing pottery, or they have a craft in building fountain pens, and they're like half hour long, and you're just watching them start with the materials and then creating it. I'm fascinated by this, and they have like a viral effect going.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's exactly the thing. And even if you think about music documentaries or any documentary, like, the most interesting parts are really when you're seeing them created. I think that's why that Peter Jackson Beatles documentary was so successful, is it wasn't the beginning or the end. It was, like, that is how they created that song. That's wild to hear.
Yeah, I think you've identified an untapped market. It's so it's so true. And as somebody who makes stuff, I want to see the process.
Yeah.
That's way more valuable.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing how I always think about these experts and these success stories, and how it's always so platitudinal, to me at least. It's just beginning, end, and off we go. Let's talk a little bit about work and what happy work looks like, because it's something you talk about in New Happy. It's such an interesting time to talk about this, as we hear this whole return to office is getting, I can't even believe we still have this conversation. And whenever I talk about return to office, I always want to qualify to anybody listening that we're not talking about this while there's still lockdowns and COVID still going. We are years past that. We've seen this massive clamoring back to everything from travel to even going to shopping malls to being together to parties to concerts. For some reason, we're very resistant to return to office, that we have employers who are pushing for it. And in a world where even prior to this, employee happiness wasn't all that high, it seems now so hard to find and so hard to understand. When we take it from the individual to the group, what are some things you would tell leaders who are trying to figure out, how do I build a culture of happiness in a world where people almost are looking to me to give them a reason why we should get together?
Yeah. I think one of the core takeaways for me of watching this unfold over the last few years has been the importance of autonomy for worker happiness and employee happiness. I always come back to self-determination theory, which is the theory of motivation that I describe in the book, which argues that we have 3 core human needs. And if they are satisfied, then we will experience fulfillment and happiness and purpose. And one of them is autonomy. And the more that we can give people the freedom to figure out how to do their work in a way that works for them, it seems that will bring them happiness and fulfillment. And we also want to make sure that we're satisfying one of the other needs, which is connectedness and being in relationship with one another. And obviously, the tension of being a human being is in so many ways about balancing those two things, right? Like, you're an individual, but you're also a partner or a father or a friend. And how do you navigate the tension that brings up in that way? And so I think my advice for leaders is always centered around, what can you do to give people a sense of autonomy over how they structure and live their days, because that has a disproportionate impact upon their sense of well-being. And then what also can you do to support their sense and their need for connectedness, which they still have, it just might need to be satisfied in a different way.
There's more to this. So let's try to unpack some of it, which is, I agree with most of that, not all, only because I think there's another part of this, which is, even if we think about helping others, if all we're doing is living in a place where it's about the autonomy and me getting through my tasks and don't worry, I'm doing that, I think there's a big gap between an employee and an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I know as a business person, I ran a digital marketing agency where we had hundreds of employees across multiple offices and some that were both freelance and remote. So we were all there before the world of pandemics and all of this. And where I spent a lot of time, where myself and my business partner spent a lot of time on the fact of there's no reason for anyone to show up unless there is a group, a brand, something that we are all aligned with, a purpose, united one, not just the individual. And there's always that balance of professional development against what do I need? The truth is, I can find anybody to do the tasks. I'm looking for someone to be part of something greater, to be part of a team. And that if we're living in this world of both autonomy and then saying, but we want connectedness and professional development, like, I do feel like they battle each other. And often an employee's needs are not really aligned with the business leaders' want, not to surveil them, but to have everybody be a part of something greater, because that might create a greater result.
Yeah.
And I struggle so much with that, Stephanie. It's one of those things where I find myself getting to really bad debates on LinkedIn about it, because I can come off looking like I am someone who is anti-union, as an example, like, oh, you're sounding like, and I'm not. I'm simply saying that if you want to do great things, we do great things together, and that often individuals don't realize that their contribution isn't just the tasks they're doing, but it's how we all do it together. And usually that happens best in spaces. I mean, would a concert be interesting if you were standing in an arena watching a band alone? It's the audience. The audience is as much the participants as the performers.
Yeah. And really, like, and sorry if I wasn't clear, but like what you're describing is a part of connectedness. It's connectedness to like the greater purpose. It's connectedness to a community. It's not, it is that sense of like transcendence that you're describing. And the key is, I believe, in what you're saying, it's how do you help people to understand that their individual actions have a greater impact and ladder up into something bigger than themselves, because employees do want that as well. They want to have that feeling, and that's something that has to be crafted by leadership in the environment. But it also is about fitting those pieces together and honoring both of those needs simultaneously.
Yeah, I always say Patagonia is a great example that we had people working there where they'd have the surfing app on their phone, and if the winds were right, it's like we're off and we're doing that. And it wasn't frowned upon because it really tied into the culture. And that when they were there, but they knew that the winds were part of the brand. It wasn't just this way to escape or get away. I love that story so much.
Yeah, me too. It's lovely.
Let's talk about the one thing that made you think differently.
I have changed my mind on a lot of things. I changed my mind about happiness. That's probably the biggest one in my life. Like, I used to believe everything old happy related. And what changed my mind was going through a period of personal suffering and realizing that clearly, like, I was doing something that wasn't serving me. I was living in a way that wasn't going to help me to achieve the goal I had of being happy. And it was that, sort of like, I guess, like rock bottom experience that helped me to recognize that, oh, like, you need to change, or you need to reconsider these ideas that you hold really dear. And as I mentioned, they were so deeply embedded because of the worldview that I had that it took a lot of deconstruction and thinking through things. So I would say that's probably been the most transformational for me, and has obviously ended up shaping my life in a lot of ways.
I love it. New book is called New Happy. Let people know where they can find out more about the book. You also create a ton of content. Let them know the channels where you have become, as they say in the promotion for the book, a social media sensation. I love that title. Yeah.
You can find it at thenewhappy.com and everywhere on social media at New Happy Co.
And what's the platform that you feel that they aligned to that title? Is it TikTok?
I think it's Instagram, just
Instagram,
because,
IG.
yeah, we have a lot of there's a lot of people who really enjoy the illustrations over there. It's a perfect platform for that.
That's great. Well, Stephanie, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.